What if a building wasn't designed to impress the elite, but to mobilize the working class? What if architecture didn't decorate ideology, but embodied it? In 1927, as Moscow roared with revolution and machines, one structure turned geometry into a call to action. This is the story of the Zuev Workers Club, designed by Ilya Golosov, a building where space became politics and where form marched in step with the future. The Soviet Union was still young. 10 years after the October Revolution, the empire had been shattered and reassembled. A new state was rising, one built not on palaces or cathedrals, but on factories, housing blocks, and workers' clubs. In 1927, Moscow was a construction site of ideologies. The working class wasn't just present, it was center stage. And architecture was their backdrop, their training ground, their ideological engine. The Soviet government launched a campaign to build workers' clubs across the nation. These weren't theaters or salons, they were social machines for reading, for organizing, for training in the new Soviet man. Into this crucible stepped Ilya Golosov, a constructivist architect with a gift for clarity, rhythm, and deeply rational form. The Zuev Workers Club was commissioned by the Union of Textile Workers, one of the largest labor unions in Moscow. Their brief was simple but radical. Build a place where workers could gather, educate, and transform themselves. Golosov was already gaining a reputation. Unlike the lyrical dynamism of Melnikov or the industrial monumentality of the Vesnin brothers, Golosov's language was measured, elegant, and orchestral. He wasn't designing as a rebel like Melnikov. He was designing as a composer of ideology. He saw architecture as a composition of functional parts legible, expressive, and imbued with meaning. His project? To turn the program into a diagram, to turn the diagram into architecture. The Zuev Club was conceived not as a monolithic mass, but as a collision of volumes. Each block was shaped by what it held. Cylinder, a glazed stair tower, a vertical drum of movement. Horizontal bands, reading rooms, offices, light-filled spaces for study. Rectilinear masses, auditoriums, gyms, and meeting halls. This wasn't just functionalism, it was functionalism in performance. The cylindrical glass tower didn't just contain stairs, it celebrated them, exposing circulation, making people visible in motion, turning daily life into ideological theater. For the Soviet state, this wasn't just clever design, it was metaphor. Transparency of glass equals transparency of government. Movement through space equals movement toward enlightenment. Constructivism was more than an art movement. It was a philosophy of change. It rejected symmetry. It despised ornament. It adored function, dynamism, and the language of machines. In the Zuev Club, Golosov embraced this fully. The building feels like it's sliding. Volumes clash and intersect like gears. Glass curves, concrete anchors. Nothing is static. Everything wants to move. Walking around it, you don't feel reverence, you feel activation. The structure feels like a film still from Eisenstein. A montage in space, each angle suggesting movement, tension, climax. This was architecture that didn't rest. It pressed forward. Built between 1927 and 1929, the Zuev Club was ahead of its time. Reinforced concrete made the floating volumes and large spans possible. Curtain wall glazing, especially the cylindrical stair tower, was innovative and rare. The interior spaces were utilitarian but flexible. Theaters could become meeting halls. Reading rooms could open into classrooms. Gyms doubled as political rally halls. It wasn't monumental, it wasn't decorative. It was a machine not for production, but for reproduction of ideology. When completed, the Zuev Club was hailed both within the USSR and abroad. Western critics marveled at its clarity. Soviet architects saw in it the purest distillation of constructivist ideals. The glazed stair tower became an icon endlessly published, endlessly admired. But like all great works of Soviet modernism, it came with a short window. By the early 1930s, constructivism was silenced. Stalinist architecture turned to neoclassicism and monumentality. Transparency was no longer a virtue, it was a threat. Golosov adapted, but the Zuev Club remained his most radical moment, and it still stands weathered, altered, but unmistakably itself. A swan song of Soviet modernity before the curtain of authoritarianism fell. The Zuev Workers Club wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for consciousness. Every wall had a meaning, every window a message, every staircase a symbol of collective assent. And it asked us nearly 100 years ago, can architecture shape how we gather? Can design reflect not just needs but values? Can geometry be a tool for social transformation? Golosov's building replied with a quiet, confident yes, a yes made of concrete and glass and belief. But what happens when these ideas, these radical geometries and social functions are internalized, not into monumental halls, but into housing? A new typology, a new ideology, a building as prototype for communal life. Click now to continue our journey through modern architecture's most radical years, because form is never neutral, and space is always ideological. If this story moved you, if you believe that architecture can be more than walls, that it can be a vessel of culture, power, and change, then don't miss the rest. Subscribe to Space, Shape, and Scale, and follow us on this chronological journey through the turning points of modern design. One building, one vision, one radical step at a time. Because architecture never stops, and neither do we.